Your camera on? Your camera on?
DYCD Barbershop Talks. Fatherhood matters. Diverse. Hey yo, these is barbershop talks where the fathers pop off. Brag about relationships and argue about sports. Every topic's a favorite, it's how we plot course toward changes. It all begins with dialogue and patience. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Chop it up, boys. Chop it up, boys. It's barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. It's barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys.
Let's chop it up, boss. Good evening, everyone. Here once again back at the Barbershop, DYCD, Barbershop Talks. We have another great panel, a great event for tonight. And tonight we're talking about the black family, what it was in the past and how it is today. There's so much different diversity in our black families, not only in just the colors and shades that we have, but in how we define family and different things that families go through. So we're going to get ready to chop it up. I'm going to pass it over to Mike Bob. Hey, Mike, how you doing? You ready to chop it up?
I'm ready. I'm ready, Scott. We're well into 2022, right? You had the theme music rocking, right? Going. It's inspiring. Yeah, family means a lot to me and all of us, and I'm glad that sometimes in the office we take that extra minute to check in on one another and how people are doing. Family is very much on my mind. I think about the different households, like I got my wife and my daughter where I reside, and how I am regularly going by to check on my mother and my uncle. The pandemic was not great. The social isolation certainly was not great. So really trying to make a point, certainly once they got vaccinated, of going by and checking in and make sure that they have the type of social engagement and stuff like that, and kind of bring everybody together too. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about family. And Jerry, what's up, sir? How are you? You
I'm
ready to talk
good.
about family?
I'm ready to talk about family. I love the concept of it. I love that family is so big, so bold, so strong that it goes beyond blood. It speaks to water and just it's defined in so many different ways. And it's really the building block of all relationships. And what does that look like? And so to be able to speak of it, especially from a perspective of color and all the different spectrums of what it intertwines with that creates this beautiful concept called family. I'm excited for the panelists and the gems that's about to drop. So another great day at the barbershop. Just like you were saying earlier, we have our own theme music now. So I'm feeling a little bit extra right now. I have some energy on this mic. And so we excited to get this going on. Let's do it.
All right.
Harry and
So
Mike, before we introduce our
yeah,
company, and Mike, you talk about family, especially how we see family. We all come from different aspects of family. Whether you come from down south, come from the islands, you come from even like from north. I always think sometimes how our northern family talk about our southern family, and we're in the same family range. Or even from like I have a friend who he grew up in Jamaica, but he moved to America at a very early age. And how his Jamaican family says, "Nah, man, you know more Jamaican. You American now. Just because of how he is. I'm not sure if I should say assimilated, but how he grew up. Because he grew up most of his life in America. Have you all experienced any of that? That cultural bond that we were taught, or that our parents were taught, it really didn't translate over to the next generation.
I definitely have experienced it. I think the first thing that came up for me just now in reaction to what you're saying, and thinking about what Jerry was just saying, that family is not just blood, but it's a lot of other things too, is part of how we define our family is what we choose to bring forward. And part of what we choose to bring forward is what was given to us or handed to us. Now, with regard to my family, I think about my mother's family and my father's family. And for my daughter, I think about what my wife's family brings to the table. But just like on the me side, I think about the grandparents, and we've talked about a lot of other stuff related to health. My grandfathers both passed away before I was born. I never physically met them, never in their presence before, but I did get to meet Both of my grandmothers, I spent a little bit of time with one, my father's mother, and a lot of time with my mother's mother. So because of that interaction, I was able to get some stories here and there. Not even a lot initially, but just a few stories here and there from my grandma's, particularly my mother's mother. And as I've gotten older, I've been hungry to learn more and unpack what those stories were about, you know? And I'll tell you one quick one, because you were asking about the cultural stuff too. My father's family is mostly from the South, from North Carolina. My mother's family, depending on which branch you go to, is either from South Carolina or from Barbados. So we definitely get a lot of this Bajan Yankee, right? And who is or isn't really West Indian, right? And but it's all love though. You know what I mean? When we get together, right? But like one of the really cool things, and I'm trying to be responsible for this with my daughter, who's 13 right now, so she can't really care about this as much as I do as an adult. When we went down to North Carolina to check on some of these ancestors, right? I got people that live right off of Highway 52, Moncks Corner, South Carolina. The back road is called Jacobs Pike Road. And I was just explaining this just the other day with my wife. That road is named for one of my ancestors, but it's like a great grandfather or like a great grandfather who sometime in the late 1700s, I think, or early 1800s, probably early 1800s, bought land from I'm going to mispronounce this, the Huguenots, but like the French settlers, who credit to the French settlers that were willing to deal directly with Black people and allow them to purchase parcels of land. So, you know, we went down there several years ago and we're looking at the census records from, I don't know, is it either 1810, 1830, something like that. And I can see from my mother's father's blah, 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 blah family, some people who, you know, were landowners from that time. That's a very long time ago. That can feel very much disconnected and away from our family history. But because my mother is who my mother is, she's, I'm trying to grab this history. I'm trying to know what's going on. I'm trying to da-da-da-da. And now I have it. And so now I have the responsibility to try to transmit it so my daughter can understand and appreciate different pieces of who she is. These Bajans live in this part of Barbados. These North Carolinians live in this part of North Carolina. These South Carolinians live in this part, and everybody converges in either Harlem or Brooklyn or where we are today. So it's deep. I'm not going to take up the whole 2 hours about it, but there's a lot to it.
Jerry, any comments before we bring in our guest?
No, I mean, I agree with it. It actually takes me back to two episodes that we did before, one being legacy and the other one being La Familia. I mentioned legacy because a lot of times when you think of family, you think of what's been passed down, going back to what Mike was talking about. One of my cousins married into the military, and her and her husband had opportunity to be based in Spain. She said, hey, when you come around, don't be surprised that they stare at you a lot. That's just them trying to figure out which family you belong to. And it's a thing where they just check to see what your cloth is. Where are you from? What does that really mean? And so the definition of family has always been just mind-blowing to me, going back to when we talk about legacy, how that gets passed on from generation to generation. One of the things that I'm doing now is checking out ancestry.com to see, okay, how far and how deep does my family lineage go? And because now I live in I say this in a lovingly Hispanic household, I'm in an intergenerational household. So for the first time, I've seen a different version of family where it was just like me and my immediate family. I have my abuela, my moms, and then I have the nephews. Like it's a whole group of us in this one place. No door, all doors are open. It's just it's freaky, but it's family, right? That's what we call family. And even understanding the intersection as well as the distance between marriage and family, right? And what does that look like? And what does that really mean? So again, excited for the conversation, and the way it all intersects and becomes this one beautiful thing is amazing.
Thank you. Well, we're talking about family, so we're going to go ahead and jump in there. And so, Mike, I'm going to let you jump in and bring some of the guests in, and then I'll come back. And then, Jerry, you'll do some people also, okay? So, Mike?
Yes, I'm happy to kick it off, and I promised that I wouldn't read everybody's long bio, although we have a lot of really illustrious colleagues with us. What I will say is, when we get ready to do these things, we're always thinking about who are great panelists and who are important stakeholders. And so DYCD, we do a lot of work with Administration for Children's Services. And so Scott and I reached out to some of our colleagues. Dale Joseph was one, and she helped us find a gang of panelists for this evening. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm going to introduce a few folks. I'll ask each of them to just briefly introduce themselves and maybe a preview of what they want to get into in this conversation. Pronunciation is always key. So I'm going to try to get everybody's name right. First, I want to welcome to the barbershop, Dr. Renair Amen. And I got that straight. If you look on the flyer, it says Amin. The pronunciation is Amen. I got it right. So
yes,
welcome to the barbershop.
Thank you. I want to say thank you for having me and allowing me to be part of this conversation. Just real quick about me, I am a relationship wellness coach and also an LGBTQ faith-based trauma advocate. So I am excited to be able to engage in this conversation around Black family. And, you know, I am excited about the fact that it's a laid back conversation and everyone is bringing their full selves to this conversation. So that's what I look forward to getting from this time and to bringing forward my true authentic self and my true authentic conversation. So thank you again.
Welcome. Thank you. We will continue to try to bring our full authentic selves. And so to the barbershop, I will now welcome another fine colleague, Elvita Dominique, also from Administration of Children's Services. Welcome to the barbershop.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with everyone. This is just such a treat for me. I haven't been with ACS a long time, just 7 months. I'm in the Office of Equity Strategies. I'm the executive director there. And, you know, I just love having these spaces where we can, exactly as Dr. Amin says, where we can kind of bring our full selves and really be able to enjoy, talk about key issues for the community. So this is amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm new to ACS, but I'm sure you have a wealth of expertise and insight to bring. Third, it's my pleasure to welcome Sylvia Springer, also from Administration for Children's Services. Sylvia, welcome to the barbershop.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. What do? I do a number of things. I'm a social worker. I'm a trainer. I do webinars on wellness. And I've worked with families for over 30 years. So I think for me, I would just like to bring up some of the concepts that I've dealt with and struggled with over the years and share it with the folks in the barbershop and see what they have to say.
That sounds good to me. So that's a few of our guests, Scott, but do you want to introduce some other folks too, right?
All right, and I'm going to try to make sure I say this correctly. Petal Foster, she's in the house. She's going to be bringing us some beautiful spirit. And I don't know with Petal, either you or Amen, which one of y'all had the best smile? But I don't know. We have to vote on this by the end of the show. But both of y'all got some great smiles, so we have to vote on one of them right now. But here is Petal Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So my name is Petal Foster Janae. I am a social worker by trade. Presently, I work with Bed-Stuy Restoration, or Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration, the one and only Bed-Stuy Restoration, on Fulton Street, of course.
That was like the Ohio State, right? You did that for Scott, right? Yeah. Okay. You did that for Scott.
I had to do it. So part of my role there, is working under the DYCD contract with the neighborhood development area. I am a lead care coordinator, which in essence is the supervisor of the unit. So I provide that support to my team and to all of our families within the Bed-Stuy Restoration construct. But I want to also say for different boroughs, and I just want to bring to the table just, in essence of what Ms. Springer said, thinking about as a social worker for the last 17 years now, I'm getting old, 17 years, thinking about some of the barriers and the struggles I have had working as a woman of color in the social work realm, trying to advocate for our, Black families. And I'm being very direct. And I'm going to say Black families, and I want to make it about Black family right now, because that's what we're talking about, trying to bring some of those issues to the table. And in this forum, to have that very relaxed conversation where we can share some of our own struggles, our successes, and, share tidbits to help us, continue to do this work and be effective at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Petal. And now we're going to bring on to the stage the one, the only, the pastor from Queens, New York. Pastor, are you ready to give us the word right now? You ready to give us the word? Pastor Brian Elliott Gibbs. Hey, Pastor.
Thank you for that. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
I'm about to come to your church one Sunday and welcome your members to you.
All right. Well, that would be great. I'd love to have that. So glad to see y'all, Scott, Mike, and all the panelists. So glad to be a part of this. My name is Brian Ellis Gibbs. I've been the pastor of Queens Baptist Church for almost 18 years now, located in Queens Village. Also been a professor with the Certificate of Ministry program, New York Theological Seminary, and dabbled and done some other things, social activism and so forth, but really excited about being in the barbershop. You know, I was sitting here trying to think of a great way to say, you know, we're going to talk about family while I get my fade, and we'll talk about the struggles while I get my shape up, and, you know, and I'm ready to go. Amen.
Amen. He knows the routine. That's what happens. He's been in the barbershop. He's back and he is ready to go. Nice.
Right, you gonna bring in our last one or Jerry?
No, go ahead.
Sure. I will do it. So one of the great things about being able to do these conversations, and I won't go too on about this. I'll just say, I think we talked about this at the year end, like we've proved the value, we think. Is why we keep going, right? And that has allowed us to expand and extend our network, you know. And so again, thank you to Dale Joseph and colleagues at ACS. We have now the pleasure to introduce to the barbershop. We just had a little miscommunication along the way. We weren't sure we were going to be able to have this gentleman join us. And I'm very thankful that he reached out. Something went to my text filter or my spam filter or something like that. He's like, can I still get down? We're like, absolutely. Until, you know, it was 6:21 right now. So you had until 6:21 to log on, and he logged on before 6 o'clock. It counts. He's in the barbershop. So I want to welcome Daryl Armstrong to the barbershop. If you're able to unmute, please do. If you're able to share screen, we'd love to see you. And count your smile among the smiles here in the barbershop.
Brother Bob, thank you. And to all the guests, real honored to be here with you all. I bring you greetings from the Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey. So we're just about an hour, 30 minutes south of you all. Grateful for Dale Joseph, a great colleague and friend who recommended me to be a part of this gathering tonight. And I want to thank everyone for welcoming me into the barbershop. We know how vital the barbershop is, particularly to Black men and to Black women and Black families. And so I'm a 22-year veteran of the Shiloh Baptist Church here in Trenton. And I'm a former director, assistant commissioner of the department in the New Jersey Department of Children and Families, where I oversaw the Division of Prevention and Community Partnerships for 3 years under the Corzine administration back in 2006 to 2009. So bring a little bit of ecclesiastical experience as well as a little government experience and a little bit of
You just went on mute.
Yeah, you may have hit a button, stray button. Brother Armstrong, you're on mute.
So, Brother Armstrong, say the last piece you said.
With you all. So thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Brother Armstrong, you may have to bring up your volume. You went real low at the end of it. We kind of missed out at the end. I don't know if you could say the last part again so we can capture that.
No, I was saying just a real honor to be here with you all. Appreciate the invitation and look forward to chewing it up here in the barbershop. Thank you.
Okay. Well, before we get started, I just want to remind our guests out there in the YouTube world that we would love to hear your comments. If you log into your YouTube account, you can interact with us through the chat function. If you don't log into yours, you can only stream and hear what we're saying. So with that said, I want to go back a little bit, and I'll go back, well, quite a bit, to our ancestors as we kind of understood when we way back in our ancestors. I mean, this is before the 1800s, before we came over here on the slave ships. Black families were really tight, and that whole kind of concept of the village working together was really a natural thing for us. And how do we go from what our ancestors knew about family to today, where it has changed? I understand slavery has broken families up and has separated us, but I think some things are just ingrained in you that nothing can take away from you, and that we have some of that senses that we still have that family dynamic. So with that said, let's move forward. Let's talk about what we understand is what original families were back when we were back in the motherland. Anyone?
Jump in, because what you said kind of made me think about a point that I wanted to bring up, which is about the fact that our families are very diverse. And when you talk about villages, it reminds me of the concept that, you have this concept of the nuclear family, but in the Black families that I've known, and we've already touched on this a little bit, folks really have kinship networks, and that act really a lot like a village in terms of supporting one another, being able to help one another raise their children. And I've seen that, I'm an immigrant as well. My family's originally from Haiti. I'm originally from Haiti as well. I was born there, but I came here when I was young. And I've seen it in both places. We really have a strong network. Actually, my family's originally from a country village, and that's just how we had to kind of get together to do everything, to farm, to build houses. You really have that reliance. But even I live right now in Harlem, and I do see that play out as well here. And I saw that growing up in the communities that I grew up in Connecticut as well, just that reliance. And so even though there's that disruption of slavery and everything that we have experienced here in this country, I do see that continuity of the importance of that network coming through.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because I grew up in Queens, and I grew up in a community where if you did something wrong in the street before you got home, your mother knew about it. The neighbor, who was really called Aunt somebody, had the ability to chastise you right there and then when you got home, you got chastised again. So it was a family. People were looking out for each other. There was a communal sense in terms of how do we raise children. And how do we keep them on the straight and narrow? And we haven't lost that. That is something that we carried over from our homeland in terms of how we worked together to really bring the village forward.
Hi, this is Petals. I'll actually piggyback a little bit on that. I'm a Guyanese Jamaican immigrant child. I was born in Guyana, raised in the United States of America by very strict, staunch military West Indian South American parents, to be quite clear. So when I say everyone was allowed to spank, well, the word was beat me, was actually, that was actually, it was normal. That was a norm. What I have seen, I think now, because of all the distress and this whole beautiful social media that we have everywhere, everything is being streamed, everything is being done. A lot of folks tend now to shy away from that way of the village raising the children. I find it happens a lot more. I go to my Jamaican family household, it's happening there within that construct. I go to the Guyanese side, it's happening there. But in terms of, if I go to my, Madison Street in Bed-Stuy, where I was raised, to my grandmother's block, it's not happening that much anymore because of the fear and the fear of retaliation and the fear of everything is now being posted. So although we still have the core of it, we have to figure out a way to continue to keep that being a healthy core and continue to share that with our young folks. Because like my daughter's generation, she does know that everyone is an auntie or an uncle. And if they do something, you're gonna get top, period. And they don't have to tell me that they're doing it, because I know that it's coming from a place of love and caring, and they're concerned about your health and well-being. So I find that now, even as a social worker, although families have that core foundation, there is a fear as to how do we safely translate that amongst each other and still remain, in essence, on the right side of the law.
Yeah.
Because that's also the other big elephant in the room, right? The law and everything now, like I said, is being broadcasted. It's everywhere. People are picking up their phones first and streaming something that's dangerous or is happening to someone else before seeking help for them. So that's also what we're combating against, our societal, sad to say, norms. It's now become normal.
You know, when
Since we have our,
you
go ahead,
opened
Mike.
up by saying the disruption of families with slavery. And although there was a disruption, I think when we came here, we learned how to form family. We still carried the concept of the village, even on the plantation. There was a song in the 80s, I think Janet Jackson sang it, and she said, "What have you done for me lately?" And I remember on the cover of Time magazine, it was, the 80s were kind of the me generation. And for some reason, for me, it kind of transferred into the 90s and 2000s, and it maybe even became deepened, where it was a lot of focus on the individual and individuality, apart from, unless you're doing something for me, unless you're benefiting my life, unless you're, doing something that there is this kind of breakaway from the whole. And so we don't necessarily operate in the collective sense unless the collective are those who benefit me, benefit my well-being. But as you know, in a family, families can be dysfunctional. Not everybody in the family is cheering for you, but they're still family. But I think that there are still moments where we will see spaces where we will see the village and the concept of family. And I like what Jerry said earlier. When I was growing up, I grew up in Jersey, in East Orange. I'm from Chicago, but I grew up in East Orange and Orange, New Jersey. And it was just me, my mother, and my father. And, sometime later, my little brother. But I learned how to create family with my friends. My friends became my family. Because my family, biological family, was in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm on the East Coast. So I learned how to do that, but I also learned in my later years to appreciate the biological family I had. So I think there's different ways we have to look at family, different ways we define family. But I think as people of African descent and of the African diaspora, the collective, the community, the village is always present. And I will even say this, we even see it in gangs. There is a collective sense of family. We even see it on the virtual internet online. Right now, those groups and all those things, they have created redefined family even online, global community, right? And so I think there's still that concept, but there's definitely been a shift and a transition of what it looks like.
I think that's very powerful. And I find that resonates for me personally too. When Scott was asking me some of the questions, and I'm talking about this branch of family, that branch of family, some of my journey there and like claiming my family or thinking through these issues is it's rooted in what was familiar to me, but then building on that. And I really get that from what you're saying too, like whether you think about the online community or you mentioned how gangs bring a sense of belonging or whatever, like people are going to try to find their tribe. So with respect to some of the earlier comments, some of our communal notions about like discipline and enforcing the rules of what as a member of the tribe you do and don't get to do, and what the consequences for behavior, misbehavior according to that tribe are, that may have changed. Like how that is performed publicly may have changed, but people haven't dramatically changed in terms of a sense of yearning to belong and finding connection. And so I think that that's a really great place to dwell in. And I want to ask some of the panelists, some of the ladies that spoke earlier, like if you have thoughts about how that gets or doesn't get reconciled. How do people try to establish what the new family mores or rules are when they're seeking out and kind of redrawing the circle? Not at the exclusion. I mean, anyone who wants to jump in can jump in, but I'm interested to hear you build on some of the things that were said earlier about that.
Well, you know what? I look at, we mentioned the disruption of how slavery disrupted our families, but yet after slavery, there was a Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau was a place where former enslaved people would go to look for a mother, a father, a child. So that kind of connection remained with us. People also learned to create the family. As the Reverend said, the people that were around you became your family, and you moved on from there. So that has always been with us. We carried that from the motherland. Now, I think in going back to the 80s, where it became very me-oriented, me-dominated, we kind of lost that kind of a concept. And I'd be interested in hearing what some of the other panelists think about what happened in the 80s that we kind of lost the yearning to be together.
Dr. Springer, maybe I think we may need to go a little bit back than the 80s, because if you go back to the end of the 50s, early 60s, when government came in and disrupted our family. And a lot of times we forget that. And since we're talking about the barbershop, we're talking about that was a period of time where they really tried to exclude the father out of the house. And, you know, we're all about well, no, some of y'all are young enough. Some of y'all don't even remember Julia, the 227, with the woman she was a nurse. And she had her son, but the social worker.
Oh, Diane Carroll.
Diane Carroll, yeah. Julia.
Julia. I thought I
Ah, yes, Julia.
So, but and I want to just go back to that, because there's a lot of stuff about that late 50s and early 60s that really did a lot of damage to the black families. And I definitely, when you got to the 70s, 80s, I think it devastated. I think it was trying to just wipe it out clearly. But I don't know if anybody wants to talk a little bit about that, because in the field of fatherhood, I talk about that period of time, how it really interrupted the family structure for that. Does anybody know what really happened during that time period?
If I may, I'd love to jump in. You know, you got to go back to the beginning of Social Security in the Roosevelt era, right? You got to go back to 1930s to the 40s, in which what we know as the modern entitlement state, or some may call the welfare state, was strictly set up for white women. It was not set up for black people, and certainly not black women. And so the idea of Social Security and a public safety net not only was not envisioned black and brown folk, it then, as you said, 20, 30 years later, even instituted the no man in the house rule, right? You couldn't get access to these entitlements if the father was in the house. And so the idea that black family have survived, 10 years, let alone the last 200 years in America, where there's been an intentional government-backed, state-incited, and even mandate to destroy black families. And the Bible tells us, how do you destroy family? You destroy the men. And nothing offensive to the women, but you look at what Moses and Jesus both went through. Pharaoh said, destroy the men, I'll destroy the baby child. Herod said, destroy the baby boys, I'll get to the Christ child. And so the destruction of men has always been the tool and the weapon to try to destroy families. And yet the miracle of God is that we survived. And the notion, I grew up in foster care and kinship care in South Central LA, in the LA Department of Children and Families. Mom, unfortunately, had a addiction to substance addiction. And so she lost all 4 of her boys. I'm the oldest of those boys. And so I experienced both out-of-home placement and child welfare and foster care and what we call kinship care. But I like to say that even before we called kinship care in the 70s and 80s, the black families were doing kinship care on plantations, right? We were raising other folks' children who were not our biological children, but by virtue of the socioeconomic circumstances, as we remember Kizzy was sold off, and she had to be raised by another plantation away from her mother and her father. Kunta. And so the idea of roots really sets an example of, despite the
demonic atrocity perpetrated on us, God's grace has still allowed us to create some sense of something out of nothingness.
And I would like to jump in on that. I'm from I live in Queens, but I'm originally from Philadelphia. And I was what they would identify as intra-family adopted, meaning I was adopted by another family member. And when I think about my other siblings, because there were 8 of us, and 6 of us weren't even raised in the same house with our biological mother for whatever was going on in her life and her struggles. And even now, engaging in this conversation around what family does really look like. And then when you add for someone like myself, who is from the LGBTQ community, where family is often chosen family and not biological family, because for whatever reason, and well, I'm sure that we'll talk about that, the family has decided, I don't want anything to do with you. And I had that period of time, even with my mom that was raising me, because of her religious beliefs, we didn't speak for like 2 years. So I think that the conversation around finding the tribe and looking at ways that all of these disruptions have come into how the family unit shows up, I do believe, and this is just my opinion, a lot of that is guided by external forces. It's guided by, religious institutions. It's guided by government agencies. A lot of the division that enters around what we identify as family, or at least how I identify as family, I always find there's a hand from someone outside of the community that is playing a part in the conversations that are taking place within family.
Yeah, if I could add real quick to that, because I'm hearing some amazing things that just has my mind and my spirit burning. I think when we talk about, and I'm being very specific, in America, right? You can't really compare family as relates to the Black culture to outside of America, because in a lot of ways, we're just not getting to a place where we can even say what it is. We never really had a chance for that. One of the terms I like to use is family gerrymandering. Literally, the family lines have been redrawn, right, to virtual groups, social groups, church groups, whoever, as I was saying, whoever would take you in. I had an amazing and powerful conversation with my mother, and it was really jokes. I was like, Mom, I come from a Haitian Caribbean background. My uncle is Jamaican. That means there was a lot of butt licking and all that other good stuff if you was off track. And all that to say, I remember we were cracking jokes of how stern my mother was, because it was education, church, and that's going to lead you to education, church, and good character would lead you to success. And her pushback was like, I had to do what I had to do because we needed to survive. Whatever it took for us to survive, that's what we were going to do. And in that space, family started to look different, because it became a lot of different social groups and friend groups. All that to say, when family is taken away, right, one of the things that is left out is the passing down of legacy, because I didn't get to really know my grandparents, and I didn't know a lot of people. And that's why I'm doing Ancestry.com. Inheritance and assets of home. We never had the opportunity because of different government things that was taken away from us, as well as what was actually passed down, debt, trauma, different forms of incarceration, whatever that looks like. So recreating what does a healthy family look like, especially for the Black family, I think that is really the powerful thing, because we're actually in a space and an era where we can, one, talk about it, two, we're taking responsibility and ownership to say, okay, how do I make it better? What does it look like and how do I make it better? So I just wanted to add to the conversation, see your thoughts on that.
I actually want to build on that. And it's actually something I've wanted to bring up a lot, because, when we're talking about, and actually goes back to what Mike was saying earlier about what are the mores of the Black family. And when we were talking a lot about the village, a lot of things we brought up related to disciplining children in a certain way. And Jerry just referenced that as well, and what do we want the legacy of the Black family to be moving forward? And, I just have this strong feeling, particularly having come through COVID and seeing the importance of community when we all couldn't be together, to really kind of shift that towards how do we really bring a love ethic, more compassion, more understanding, particularly to the young children, and pass that down as a legacy, and what we can build on.
You want to jump in real quick and then hand it back off? I wanted to react to what Jerry said.
You, Mike. I want to say something after
Oh
you.
yeah, go. You can go, and I'll wait. That's fine.
You sure? No, you.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, I don't know what definition of family everyone's operating out. Because there is, I think, for the most part, we operate out of a construct that was given to us. And I'm going to say a Western construct, a European-centric construct of family. Mother, father, dog, son, daughter, dog, cat, white picket fence, White House, that kind of thing, right? That was, I don't know if that's at its core who we are as people of African descent, though. And so we operate out of this construct, even the categories we have, immediate family, extended family. For me, family was family. There was no category. There was no immediate extended. I didn't start hearing no immediate extended until, I started getting around people who, were after degrees and so forth. And, people who were intelligent, more intelligent than I was, because I didn't know anything about immediate and extended. I just knew that was my cousin. They were family. That was my uncle. He was family. I didn't know anything about that. And so we operate out of these constructs. And then Brother Darrell talked about, state-sponsored, attempts to destroy the family. I mean, there's church-sponsored attempts to destroy the family, to be quite honest. And so there's these constructs we operate out of that have been unhealthy and toxic. And I remember, and then you talked about inheritance, Gary. Well, a lot of our stuff is inherited trauma because of what has happened to us. And we haven't been able to resolve and heal from that because we're still operating out of a construct that does not belong to us. And it's not authentic to who we are. When I was growing up, my grandmother did this. She lived on 36th Place, right off of State Street. And on State Street in Chicago, there were some of the most notorious projects, Stateway Gardens, Robert Taylor homes. And we're talking about home of the Blackstone Rangers and who are now, I guess, called the Gangster Disciples and so forth. There were children who would walk past her house every day going to school. My grandmother, whose father was from Barbados, my grandmother would sit out on her porch and she would wave to the children. And if a child needed to use the bathroom, nowadays, I don't even know if that happens anymore, but if a child needed to use the bathroom, my grandmother would say, come on in, baby, use the bathroom. Not only would she allow them to use the bathroom, she'd make sure that before they left, they had food to eat and something to drink. I understood that family community. There was, I didn't know that dude. I was like, who's up in my grandmama's house? But at the same time, it was like, my grandmother's doing this. This is something, there's something about this. And I think that we've really got to, I think COVID and the lock out, lock in, shelter in, whatever it is, has really given us reason to really rethink, relook. I know for me as a pastor, rethink, relook at what church is, but also rethink, relook at what family, community is. Because I think we've been operating out of some unhealthy spaces when we think about the definition. But it's just my 2 cents right now.
That is all very powerful, and I'm glad I was quiet and let you build on that. Right. One thing that you pointed to now it makes it easy for me to respond to, because it was something I wanted to touch on. When Jerry used that term, was it family gerrymandering? I got triggered. I think that's the first time during a conversation where I realized right away, like, someone has said something and now I'm triggered. So I wanted to respond to that in no way critical of what Jerry said. But I realized from the very first question Scott asked, we jumped into a very high level of discussion that I don't think we should back off of. But it's very interesting because when he first asked the questions, like, bam, we're going from slavery to now right away, everything, which is cool. And it's brought us to this space where, as you pointed out, Rev, we really haven't defined either for this conversation or each panelist what we mean by family, what we define by family. And it's kind of fun that it has evolved that way. And I think your comments and many of our comments are provoking that discussion that definitions of family have been handed to us. And so frustration over how family has been defined by others about us is contributing, maybe a factor as to why I got triggered by that suggestion, you know? And when I hear gerrymandering, and this is not a conversation about government and politics specifically, right? But that particular sense that I draw from it is that there are certain persons who enjoy power leverage, and they're carving things up in certain ways that are beneficial to them. And so I think even where we as individual families and societally may be fictive kin, and you're my play cousin, and you're like, we're trying to empower ourselves, but are still existing within context where others are trying to define us while we are competing with trying to define ourselves. So I think we want to try to recognize that now and unpack that as we go. And I'm just also going to ask David and folks who kind of listening in this conversation, let us make sure that along with the resources we intended to share today, if we may need to pull a couple of resources from prior conversations we've had, like about trauma, maybe we need to pull all that, because if anyone else is in this conversation, you may have been triggered a couple of times. No one's fault. No one is trying to get anyone upset. We're just trying to jump in. Please respond in the YouTube chat with your questions, with your comments as we continue to go. But I know that I got plugged in right now. And it wasn't what Jerry said. It's just I realized right away the intentional as well as the unintentional consequences of others in defining who we are, who our communities are, for whatever their immediate short-term purposes may have been over the course of decades and centuries. Now, there's a cumulative impact of all this short-term decision-making or convenient reasons why things have been done. And I do think as we go and we look at an impact, along with talking about how we should define ourselves, how we have defined ourselves, looking at some of the competing factors as well, class and gender play out. When we were talking earlier about social welfare policy, that hit me too. If a system has been designed in a way that has made some assumptions, and some of them pejorative about women with children, right? But is designed to deal with a problem that's defined with like a problem group that doesn't even consider another group, but other people are at the impact of those decisions. That's a lot to try to unpack.
I think we all just got traumatized, Mike.
Sorry, I was trying to get us out of it.
No, it was good. It was good.
It
was good. It was good.
It was all excellent, but it was very traumatizing because you know, and when you said, Mike, what happened to me, I started thinking about even within what we are told is our family, and that gerrymandering, because then we start cutting family members out who may not sit to what we want. And Pastor, you almost, Pastor, you're scared the mess out of me because we do that in church also. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're supposed to be welcoming people in, talking about bringing people into the flock, and we're carving around the flock to make things happen. And then, but we sit and listen to I'll just say a social whatever, and it's trying to define to us what we are. And that's really tough.
Who we are.
Who we are, also.
Yeah.
I don't think we...
What we are and who we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, if I could just add to what, like my personal space that's being created right now, I didn't realize it. I know one thing. Anytime you have Thanksgiving or you have a family conversation, family dinner, all the good stuff comes out, right? And so we have these real deep conversations.
That closet everybody's been trying to keep
right. When we really have a family talk, it's like, okay, let's really have a family talk. And that's actually something that's been instituted within my family where we're like, we're going to take a deep dive and really reflect. And I think when we talk about past and present, like for me growing up from a representation standpoint, like everything was geared towards, I'm gonna say this, like the Cosby show, right? Like that's what the Black family is supposed to look like. And But like in my family, like we didn't have a doctor yet, right? Like we like it wasn't whole, like everyone wasn't there. And it was like, it was almost untangible to even reach it because it wasn't true to what was happening on the ground. And so it was like, for my peers, we were like the first of it, right? Like I was the first successful person within my household. And then, okay, how do I carry that torch? And what does that look like? And along the way, my family grew to people who were outside for various reasons. Same thing like Pastor was saying, some biological people simply for survival, where I can't be a family member right now. I just have to survive. So I tapped out. And then other people going back to the village began to help raise and groom me. And we call them mentees, but I really forget mentor. You just became my brother, my big brother. Like, this is why I need you to guide my life. And so when we talk about it, I almost think it's unfair to talk about the definition of the Black family without also adding, how do we heal and help support the Black family, right? Like, how do we help show them their own mirror? And I say individually, even though it's like one group, but just as within your family, okay, this is what it looks like, this is what it can be, this is everything you were, and then you have so much more ahead of you. So I actually want to pivot that and give that back to the panelists.
Well,
go ahead, Ms. Sylvia. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You said something that was very interesting in terms of how do we define success? Because the Cosby family that you mentioned, everybody was successful. And we thought as a family, this is who we had to be. Like, everybody had to be, you had a doctor, you had a lawyer, you had aspiring college students, but that's not a real family. And even from the show Julia, we have been trying to fit ourselves into a mold that may or may not be us. We have yet to define, what does success mean in a Black family, in Black culture? Does it mean that we drive the Mercedes and have the BMW in the driveway? Does it mean that we have the big house? Does it mean that we're talking about, we got to get another condo because the one we have is not big enough? What does it mean? And I think when we can begin to look at what success is and define it for ourselves, not what other people think.
I'm with you, Miss Sylvia. I wanted to respond to one thing you said, that when you said the Cosby family is not a real family. So technically that's true because that's a TV show. I understand what you're saying. But I will say, and consistent with some of the things that I said before about family is also what you experience and what you see and what you bring forward. I do have people in my peer group who that's a very real Black family because it looks like their family. My family didn't look like that, but their families did look like. I do know people my age who both parents had graduate degrees and blah, 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 and all that sort of thing. And then that was normal for them. I think the Cosby Show at that time tried to insert in the media a version of families that until that point, other people hadn't seen. Other people didn't realize that was a real family. You know what I mean? We're pointing to Julia. I have some recollection of that show. That's a great example of a different kind of family. And she was trying to make it happen too. But if people believe that was a myth and it never happened, it's good to know that that's in the mix. So how could we be liberated by that as one example, as opposed to now define that our family is somehow falling short if we don't look like this one family that, Cosby may have presented just to try to open up the gates of understanding that a family even could conceive. Not that we were all supposed to look like that, but that it could even conceivably look like that.
All right. So I think I'll pick up a little bit of what, I definitely can relate very deeply with what Gerry mentioned and what Ms. Sylvia was saying as well, in that when she's asking the question about how do we define success, right, in the Black family? I know growing up, I heard constantly, it was the most running theme in the household, that you had to get an education, you had to excel. Once you became an adult, you went to college, you got all those degrees, then you had to get a house. And I can speak more for the Guyanese Jamaican, having that house, hallelujah, that meant that you were successful. House, you're educated, so that you can eloquently speak about, you know, what your home is. That was for me. That's how I was raised, believing that that was the true definition of what success was for my family. But then as I grew and I interacted with all the other different, socioeconomic constructs around me, I went to school, to Georgetown University, came back to Brooklyn College, went to Adelphi, I saw a different aspect as well of what family was. Although those were my core foundational, I guess, building blocks, I also saw the piece where, to Jerry's point, that and to Pastor Brian, that my family, I realized I rejected a lot of my blood family, and I started to pick people that I wanted to mirror what I believe success was for me in my household or in my, my realm. I had those people come into my room, I would bring them into, and they became my family. So even now, when I look back, if you ask my daughter, she'll say, well, our family looks really interesting. I have the biological part, which I tend to, for my own mental health and my own, so I can remain, I guess, sane and not go crazy on anyone. I tend to, like the Jerry's point, step away. You remove yourself from situations so you can continue to be healthy. And then I find that the people that support me and support what I find to be successful and what I believe success is for me as a Black woman, a mother, a wife, a daughter, all of those things, they look very different because I have chosen them based on what I want them to be for me. So I've created, in essence, my own little village. So I went out kind of like into the village and I picked my shaman, I picked the elder here, I picked this other person there, and I brought them all together. I am sponging from them and they are also sponging from me. So we're having a symbiosis happening. That makes sense.
Yeah, no,
I love it.
a lot of sense. And I just want to add just a tidbit to that, based on what Sylvia was putting into the space, which was about how we define success. And to me, what you're describing is creating family that's supportive and accepting, of the people who are in that unit. And, when I think about, so our office does, equity work, both on the race side and the LGBTQ plus side. And when I think about the LGBTQ plus youth, I think about that space, where they may not feel so supported or accepted within their families, and they have to go out and find other spaces and other people to provide that support. And so to me, to Sylvia's question about what is success, to me, a successful family is when the folks in that family, when those folks actually feel supported, they feel accepted, they feel loved. And that's what we should be trying to support when we put policies in place.
And just to add to that, because I was going to say something very similar, especially around LGBTQ youth, at the end of the day, sometimes the community is found in the ballroom. It's found down by the pier. It's found, wherever they are able to find people that will love them, accept them, allow them to feel safe. Sometimes success is just simply having a roof over your head. So I think that, and I remember my mom instilling in me that education part and get the house part and make sure you do this. And now I think about it, I'm like, I have student loan debt, I have this, I have that. And had I known some of the things that I needed to know, and I think that's the other part of having a conversation around what it means to be successful. What comes with this level of success that you are pushing me to go into? What comes with this conversation around student loans? I'm sure a lot of people that I've conversed with that have talked about their student debt. Like, I owe a mortgage, back. You know what I'm saying? And so what is the point in moving in this conversation of education without thinking of the longer consequence of what happens when this person is done school? What happens is when this person does acquire the house? What happens when this person does set themselves up in a family unit? Because sometimes success is just finding a family. What do we say to all of the things that come with that, the debt that comes with that, the anxiety that comes with that, the trauma that comes with trying to recreate a family when you already thought you had one.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Hey,
That's deep.
That's deep. That's
Amy,
profound.
that's heavy. And I want to introduce two more of our panelists coming in. Doctors, Dr. Mincy's, both of them are doctorate of Columbia University. Dr. Philona Mincy and Dr. Ronald Mincy have joined us too. And they have, Dr. Mincy's, I want to get it correct, 47 years of experience of a family dynamic.
I mean,
you're close. You're close.
I'm sure by how many decades? No.
Not quite.
40,
I'm not gonna get anybody in trouble for getting it because I don't remember mine.
46 going on 47.
Okay, I know I was close.
Bless you both.
So yeah, we're doctor this, doctor that. We're too dumb to put the screen to get the screen. So, but we apologize for breaking protocol. But it's good to be with you. Can I try to pick up right where Dr. Amen left off?
Yeah, because we're just trying to, because we were talking about family. Right now, we got to the point that family was kind of designed, talking about your success and making that's part of your family. And we went kind of way back. We started a lot of different things and how the village is a family, how in gangs there's families, how we have never really defined what family is to us. I guess here in America, I'll use that way of doing it. We talked about how we gerrymander our own family dynamics. You know, what does it mean? And we do it in our religion. We do it in really different things. And we're just looking at, you know, I guess right now, just keep talking about family is really designed by you. And whatever it means. Family is basically you and how you decide what family is and what the make of it is. And I just wanted to kind of give it to you because I know both of you are social workers and you all probably have done a lot of extensive study and work around family dynamics. And, you know, Amy was just talking about, you know, could you be happy? You know, that's why I got Amy. I wanted to make sure, could you be happy being $90,000 in debt because you got a house and the Mercedes Benz and you got all this stuff? But are you still happy as a family? Or does that define you as family? So I don't know, and I don't want to be about $90,000 in debt for nothing, you know. But how does that sit with you all? And I know you all with your lovely grandchildren, your sons and wives that they have, you know. How does that family? Because you know, and you all, I think you just told me when I talked to you before, y'all got stuck together as a really family unit during COVID, where everybody was in the house with you all because they got caught stuck and they couldn't go back. They had to stay with you all. So how was that?
So first of all, you know, again, thanks for inviting us. I don't know if Fun is going to pick up on the same note that I'm about to pick up on, but first of all, I'm an economist, right? I'm not a social worker. Okay. I teach in the School of Social Work, but I'm an economist. And Dr. Amen, one of the things I think a lot about when I think about family and what the boundaries of families are, because you talked about different ways of defining family. It's not so much about, you know, who are the people I closely associate, but who are the people to whom I'm going to leave my assets and to who is going to be indebted or not by the debt I acquire. And how do we think about, you know, when I think about, particularly in that way, when I think about you're talking about debt and the like, I'm going to think about intergenerational transfers of net worth, right? And so as close to people as we get, our financial legacies are usually left to our blood relatives, even when we have challenges with our blood relatives, right? And so I just want to contribute in a way by redefining it. And it gets a lot easier for me to define family when I think about, and this is real for us, right? I'm approaching 70. I'm smart enough not to know her age, right? I ain't going there, right? Okay, right. But I'm 70. I'm approaching 70, And I think about my legacy, right? Not only legacy in all sorts of ways, but especially my financial legacy, right? And and I can think about, I had a lot of college debt, right? Because my mom never went to college, right? However, my mother, I never owned a home. She never owned a home. However, thank God, I will leave my kids with assets. I will leave my kids with homes, a home, because I help them save for their homes. They're not acquiring as much debt moving into wealth asset accumulation as I did, because I didn't have parents to help me acquire those initial assets. So Dr. Amen, when I think about wealth, yes, we in a cohort, we may be carrying a lot of debt, but the question is, as we think over time, right, what kind of situations are we going to leave our children in? Because we learn things about debt and we learn things about assets and debt that we can teach to our kids, right? And so for me, then the conversation about, I mean, I have some friends that I love and who've contributed to me in a lot of different ways, but I'm not leaving my assets to them, right? I'm leaving my assets, I'm really focused, right? I know where those assets are going, and I'm thinking about making sure that my granddaughter is interesting. So when I'm not going to, you're going to tell me to shut up pretty soon, but so when I was in college, I went to college, everybody was wealthier than I was. Everybody, the black folk, the white folk, everybody, right? Everybody had more money than I did. And I knew it. At one point, when I was in college, I worked 40 hours a week in Widener Library, where all my classmates were going to football games and doing the college thing, you know. I was working right? But, and so when I want to make sure that my granddaughter has zero debt when she goes to college, right? And so my son is saving for her college education, but so am I. So that when she goes, she can go to, and she plays basketball and she doesn't play football, tennis, right? She can do all them fun things that I whined about, right? Because I couldn't do it, Dr. Amen, but she'll be able to do it. And so it's not unlike, you know, the families that left us here. This is intergenerational transfer, right? We're gonna say something very simple, right? My kids are gonna do better than I, and my mother did her thing, right? She put me in a position to do as best I could. I'm about to check out. You know something? Here it is. I'm modeling at this. My son now makes more money than I do, right? And I joke about this all the time. And so it occurred to me the other day, I was saying to myself, you know, Flona, the next time we go on a family vacation, they are going to pay for it, right? Because they make more money than I do. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I paid a bill, right? I paid it up to this point, but now you're making more money than I. Isn't that interesting, right? So now, and next time we come from a family visit, right? Guess what? You're going to pay for the housekeeper because you make more money than I do. So even though I just got out of, disposed of all my college debt. That took a long time. It was really an investment, okay? And at some juncture, Dr. Amen, that debt is going to be gone. You got to keep paying it and paying it. But the question is, what is the financial legacy that you're going to leave behind, including how to manage the debt, right? Not how to carry, but how to manage it, and how not to buy some of the things that you may have bought when you're younger just because you're looking. So last thing, I have this, my favorite research assistant, and we're good friends. She just bought a Tesla, right? And it's all good. And it's a nice car and all that kind of stuff. But guess what? I paid off my car loan. I don't know. That's because of her, because she don't like debt, right? I paid off my car loan so long ago, and I'm going to drive this car. And when it drops dead, I'm going to pick myself out of it and walk away. I will never have another college loan. So not in addition to acquiring asset, I also learned some stuff about debt and wealth management that my mother could never have taught me. But those came at a price. So I only have that's my problem. I grew up with brothers and I had no sisters, so I knew nothing about women. Zero. I didn't have any sisters to school me about stuff, right? So I love 3 women. I love my mother, I love my wife, and I love my daughter-in-law, because my daughter-in-law, my son has no debt, none, right? They've gone to graduate school and she grew up in a family similar to ours. They have 0 debt. So yes, we pay a price in our cohort, but our kids are learning some things from the mistakes and ignorance that we have, and they will never be in. And so I'm looking at the intergenerational wealth transfer and say, yeah, I paid some tough dues, times were hard, but thank God I'm good.
Oh my gosh, bombshells. Dr. Flonamenzi, did you want to get a word in, Edgewise?
He said it all. You see, that's what you get for having an economist, give a talk and wealth management. But a key point that Ron made was that of legacy. And I think we approach our relationship, we approach family as the same thing. We were going to be there for our family, God willing. And we were going to make sure that we provide in such a way that they're better off than we are. So it's so important when we think about family and family wealth and guardians, what it means. And for me, family is about the foundation. And I look quickly at, I won't go into all the things I talk about, but I look at the word family. And I look at the Y in family, and there's 2. When you look at a Y, they have like 2 branches. And for me, the first branch is the F, and we can call that for some of our families, whether that's going to be the father or the female. And the other branch is whether you're going to be the male or the mother. So I look at it that way, and all the offshoots that goes with it. And the responsibility of a family is to lay that foundation for which your children is going to follow through. And Ron is right. I ditto everything that he says, but we started off by what is it that we want to leave for a family? What examples that we're going to set? How are we going to behave? We're going to create a foundation, for them so that they are better off. And it's not just, wealth, it's a spiritual foundation as well, where you are. And as one, talk about, making sure that we provide for them. And I was smiling, and Reverend, you're gonna like this, because, when you think about it and you have to do your will, the church come in there someplace, how much you're gonna leave, because, there is a spiritual foundation, for us anyway, there's a spiritual foundation. And how do you wanna also help to provide, as churches or religious organization move forward, how do you help that move forward? And so for us, there's those things in our lives, and to make sure that our kids or children, and passing on to our grandchildren have that strong stability, something to look back on, and to watch our granddaughter. She's already, thinking about, where she's going to college. She's not even halfway there yet. But where she wants to go, and she wants to follow in, like his footsteps, where he goes, and the whole 9 yards. So it's a beautiful thing when we can, in fact, instill that kind of attitude, that kind of accessibility, that kind of assistance that our children need to move forward. And for me, I look beyond that. I look a little bit also to our communities where I can also be that example, be that one to say to that young man or that young woman, when I see something off, in a way, presented in a way that is receivable, not chastising, but encouraging. And you can imagine how that work when you take an interest in somebody else's child, and that child is so grateful, for you. And I'll stop there.
So, and let me say one other thing about legacy, right? Neither of us grew up with a father. None of us. Neither of us, right? And that's the other legacy that we left for our children. I will never leave my kids in the position that my father left me. And she had the same experience. So we got married when I was 24 years old, right? And I'm not doing her age, right? But at that moment, I knew no matter what she does to me, I will never leave her in a position that my father left me. And why? Because I knew what that was as a child, and I didn't want to hand that off to my children, right? That commitment and the grace of God has enabled us to endure all the nonsense that married people go through, right? We are not special, right? We had a knockdown, drag out fight last night, right? But it was the same practice. Do not, what is it?
Don't go to bed angry.
Let the sun go down in your anger, right? I was,
Absolutely.
she's kicking me. She's kicking me. I was so mad. But, do not let the sun go down on your anger. If you don't forgive others, that God won't forgive. Same 9 yards. That same, but why? Because I had the experience of growing up as a child without a father. It wounded me, right? She had a similar experience, and therefore we wanted to leave a legacy for our kids. If we looked at our parents, we had no idea how to do family. Sorry, in the traditional way. No idea how to do marriage because our parents didn't model it for us. So we had to figure it out on our own. But the one thing we went with is, I'm married to you, you're married to me. That's it, right? And we are going to leave for our kids a model for that so that they can seek the same thing. And the other thing, the last thing I appreciate about my daughter-in-law is this is my daughter-in-law, right? She will sit down and ask us questions. How did y'all do this? How did y'all do that? Stuff that my son doesn't do. So again, I only have sons, and I only have brothers, but through my daughter-in-law, I get to learn stuff about young women that I never knew before. It's like amazing. So again, for me, family is very, very clear. I love all of y'all, right? But I actually know the difference between who the source of my legacy is and who all the other people whose lives hopefully I will affect positively, who they are and what I'm going to do for them. But in the end, in the same way, I set sort of priorities about who is the most important person on the planet to me, right? And our children. And likewise, now those scales are turning over. Right now, they give me direction. Dad, you got to do this. Dad, you got to that. Blah, 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 blah. And because they complied when I said yes, and I'm getting a little older and the tables are turning, I owe them compliance as well. Right? We established a pattern. They know some stuff that I don't know, right? And I know it, right? And therefore, because they complied with me, now it's time for me to comply with them. Dad, maybe you better get rid of some of this furniture. Dad, maybe you better retire. And then I'm listening all the time, just trying to soak it in and say, actually, I ought to think about that differently and do the things that work and don't. So I'm zipping it up.
Wow.
I am so triggered.
He's so triggered.
I'm so triggered right now.
There's so many chats going on.
She has her unmute off. I saw Brother Daryl.
Everyone wants to jump in.
If we were in the barbershop, we would be debating right now. So we're in the barbershop, right? I am so triggered right now. But I want to let my brother Daryl, I saw his unmute off a long time ago. I know I'm not the host, but I got some stuff.
Pastor God, I'm gonna follow you up. I know Dr. Mir got some. Go ahead, Daryl. Do your thing.
I just want to make sure we return to saying Dr. Amin, because I gave myself all this credit. Yeah. Excuse me, Amin. Because I gave myself all this credit, I got it right. So let's make sure that we say that, and I'll pause because other people are burning even more than I am.
I also make a comment that I think we have some questions coming in from YouTube. So I think we're on a roll right now. So go ahead, Dave. Daryl, go ahead.
No. I listen. When you got Dr. Mincy, fatherhood specialist and family expert, nothing more needs to be said. So. There'll be some other comments coming up, but I'm going to defer to whoever's next.
Okay.
I believe it's Dr. Amen. I hope I said it right. Did I say it right? Amen?
Amen.
Amen, like the prayer. Amen. I got it.
Go ahead.
All right.
Well, I do want to respond because a part of me feels like, Dr. Mincy, I know you came in on the tail end of my statement. So I was not really talking about that. I was talking about LGBTQ, young people, and the notion of what family looks like. But I do want to respond back to some of what you said. And I mean this in the most respectful way. So please hear my heart and not necessarily my words. Some of what I'm hearing, and even how I move through the world, I had to identify that I'm privileged in a way, that there's a way that life shows up for me that doesn't show up for the rest of my community. And so although for instance, I want to go to the reference where you talked about intergenerational wealth. Like my mom, when she transitioned, she left things behind, but she left it to a sibling who was going through their own addiction. So everything that she left for them is now gone. And now they're looking at me and I'm going, I don't know what to tell you, because I don't know how to deal with that. And so I think that although sometimes we come into the space and we're able to create something different for our family, that's how many of us define what success looks like, because we have concluded, I want to create something different than what I've experienced. And whether I'm marking that as being able to have a car because I'm used to being on public transportation, or being able to have a backyard because I've never been able to play outside, the levels of how we identify success are often attached around what we are looking to experience and create for ourselves in this time. And so when you are dealing with a community similar to the LGBTQ community, where family is often not the family that they are born into, it's often the family that they have created, then the conversation of generational wealth is like on the last of the burner, because they're still dealing with how to be even functioning and existing in a society and in a world that says that they shouldn't be. So that's kind of what I wanted to, and I thank you for allowing it to come back this way for me, because I was sitting here and I was like, oh wait, but that's not what I was talking about. But let me come back and engage it just as a reminder that, yeah, there is a conversation that is had, but when we add in an additional marginalized sector of the marginalized community, we have to then add in an extra layer of empathy, conversation, and compassion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Pastor Gibbs, you want to jump in there? I know you had some other stuff. Pastor
Yeah,
Gibbs?
I want to thank everybody for what you've said. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Dr. Mincy, I want to thank you all for your words, because it triggered me in a way that I thought about my own experience. So my parents were divorced, and for years, terrified of marriage. Don't it's just kind of like, what is that? What but that's the model, right? Man, woman, have children, that kind of thing. And then I also think about my background. So my father's side was Black bourgeoisie, and I'm talking about the real Black bourgeoisie. I ain't talking about the Black bougie stuff they do now. I'm talking about real Black bourgeoisie, all right? And y'all know what I'm talking about. And then I'm talking about the E. Franklin Frazier Black bourgeoisie. And then my mother's side of the family was working middle class. And so I come from these two spaces, and there were different expectations and understandings about wealth, about money, but they had common, there was a core value around community and family. Whatever that looked like for them, there was community and family. And I hear that, and everybody here is talking about family and community. And you have defined for yourself what is family and community. Dr. Mincy, my father would probably pat you on the back and shake your hand. Y'all can go out for drinks, because he would be on the same page with you in terms of legacy, assets, and so forth. For me, I also think about trauma. There is a trauma, and you all are, who've done social work, you all know this very well. There is a trauma that has passed on Some of us have resources to heal from that trauma. Some of us tuck it away, don't ever talk about it. You know, you have those grandparents or great grandparents that don't ever talk about the back in the past. They don't want to discuss it because it's painful. But there is trauma, there is a level of toxicity that we pass on until someone says, or becomes, I can't even say that, until someone becomes aware of the pain they have and becomes aware that, you know what, this is not healthy. And until that happens, you've got this continued. So for a lot of folk of color, Black, brown, they're still dealing with trauma.
It's accumulating, it's cumulative.
And when we see it happening every day where somebody's getting shot, somebody's getting arrested, somebody's getting pulled over, somebody's getting beat up or beat down, somebody is not promoted, somebody is looked over, somebody's neglected, somebody's marginalized, and it just happens repeatedly. And so for me, family has not just been my biological family, which is so critical and important for me, but family has been created because I've needed healing.
Yes.
I needed community.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if I'm gonna leave money to them, but I believe I needed, but I don't know, but I needed community to help me heal from the pain and the trauma. I would even suggest that some of the very things that we judge, some of the very spaces we judge, are some of the very spaces where people find God, or people find love, or people find support, or people find community.
Absolutely.
And so for me, family is so dynamic in how we define it. Family is so diverse in how we define it. But at the core, I think Sister Elvita talked about the love ethic. And I think for me, at the core of family and community is where I find unadulterated love for who I am, not for what I can do, not for what I can give you, not for what I can provide, not for what I do, not for my role, not for my function, but who Brian is. That's family for me. Take the name pastor off, take the degrees away, take the fact that I went to the greatest HBCU on the face of the earth, Morehouse College, take that all away. And I just want somebody to love Brian, because Brian needs the love that I did not receive, or Brian needs love that I need to have. And I found it in God, but there is that physical of love that comes through people.
Yes.
Oh, I'm not just rambling. I'm really, because
No, you're not.
Go ahead. No,
Not at all. You got it.
and the idea and what and all this was been said in terms of how do we, and you said you wanted to really move towards this forward movement. I think forward movement and next steps kind of thing. I'm a next steps person. I think Black families in particular, we need to help each other heal. And a way we need to help each other heal is to begin to really operate out of space that's non-judgmental.
Heal ourselves first.
Yes.
Yes, because I'm a pastor, so I know a little something about judgmental spaces, but and you say, well, why would you know about judgmental spaces? Because that happens directly in the church, of course. We bring this stuff here. And I got to deal with all the people's stuff, but where people there is a means to healing. I think the story of roots that my brother Daryl brought up earlier, they were connected because they helped each other not only to survive, but to heal and then thrive. And maybe that's some of the missing piece around family because we've been so attacked and damaged that I don't even know if we know how to help each other heal, survive, thrive, succeed. And so that I just really need to get that out because that I will say, you know, I find a sense of love in here and a sense of community, even in this space as we talk about this stuff.
Reverend Ellis Gibbs, I do think we figure it out, you know, even if there's no degrees or formal education or therapists involved, although any of those things might help deepen and broaden and accelerate those processes, you know. And I do feel the sense of love in this conversation and understanding, and I feel from launching from Scott's very first question all the way through, we're interacting in a way at a very high level. And these conversations are very nuanced. So I feel like we keep unpacking and defining and refining what we mean, and then going on to the next thing and kind of scaffolding and building. A lot of what Dr. Mincy and Dr. Mincy said earlier, it resonated for me in terms of my personal story. I'm glad that I waited and listened to y'all as you unpacked some of the stuff and layered back some of our prior understandings. One quick thing that hit me when Dr. Mincy was talking about being in Widener Library. I have my my story about having to work nights I was in a different library. I was in Hollis Library, but doing it and falling asleep in the library while I was pledging. And that came up for me. A lot of members of Kappa Alpha Psi have made their way in the barbershop too, because along with my family of origin and the family that I declared by, you know, the spouse of my wife having a child or whatever, right? My brothers have become my family too, differently. And I think we will look to calibrate expectations based on where we are. So my chapter brothers know this story, and I try not to tell other people's story, just my story. But because we went to good schools and we were doing okay, our conversation was about whether we would buy property where our school was, so the next generation of kids would have some place to live, and da-da-da-da. We used to kind of get on each other when it came up that we hadn't done it, that we hadn't invested in that wealth. Maybe they'll call me out for bringing this up, or maybe 5 years from now, somebody who's doing far better than I am and the others are, maybe that they'll do it. But that was the way that we managed our expectations right then. And a few guys here and there would go into business with one another, and maybe it went well. And if it went bad, maybe it had a falling out or whatever. But like, those brothers were managing expectations of wealth and of community with what made sense in that conversation. I have friends of color, people I'm very dear to from my high school, but that was not the crucible for having those conversations. We just don't have those kind of conversations. So I think there's that old expression, like when you know better, you do better. Whatever that better might be. If it's shelter, you're rallying to your tribe. Let's make sure that we are safe and that we have shelter. If you can scaffold and build on that, let's begin thinking about generational wealth, then you may recalibrate based on that. So there's more that I could say, but I want to stop, and I want to make sure that other people are jumping back into this conversation. But I'm so glad that these things have arisen. And for me, it's about the weaving. You know, like I think about my daughter's godfather. That's my line brother. You know, and it's funny because when I met him, and he knows the story, and I've told the story before, he and I didn't necessarily like each other at first. And as we got to know each other and realized we had a lot of kindred things and spirituality among them, but, you know, plans for the future among them, it's like he ended up being like one of the best guys in my life.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in with that. I think Mike just dropped a gem, and then Pastor Brian, thank you so much for being vulnerable and creating just almost opening a different door to a different space. One of the things that I also want to add to this conversation was that, so one, T.D. Jakes one time gave this great anecdote. He said one time this dog had a few puppies. Now the dog who had a few puppies, their leg was broken. And when the puppies came out, they all started limping just like their mother, even though there was nothing wrong with their legs. But that's what they saw, that's what they knew, that's what they thought it was. And they had to go through a process to realize, no, you can walk perfectly fine. It was just your mom wasn't well. And all that to say, I came from a a different household. I think I love Dr. Minzy and I love what was said, but I also know that's the standard and the pathway to get there looks different for all people. One of the things, the dynamics I came from, just to share a little bit of my personal story, when I was divorced, and I'm being really transparent in that space, in my mind, and based off of stuff that I heard, your family is broken, right? That's what I thought. It was a wrap. It's broken. It's a wrap. What does that look like? And then I had to have great people come around me and say, no, nothing's wrong with the family. That relationship didn't work out, but the family's still whole, and it's your job and your responsibility to keep handling that business. So to this day, like my daughter, she has a trust, and there's money that's already built up to get transferred over. But there was a determination to not get caught up with what I thought was a broken leg. And I was walking around doing the same thing that my mother was doing, because her family, she, I come from a lineage of different people whose relationship didn't work out. And what that meant to us was that one person totally leaves and you're on your own, right? And so how do I say, okay, cool. Just because that didn't work out doesn't mean that the family doesn't work out. They ain't got it. One doesn't have anything to do. It's better when it's together, but that doesn't mean it has to be fully separate. And so creating those dynamics, going back to what Pastor Brian said, I heard this amazing quote. It said that home is not a place. Home is where you feel the most secure in your most vulnerable state. Creating a space where I can say, this is my home, i.e. this is my family. Now, no matter what happens, whatever risk factors, I know we can still tie this in together so that when I do leave my legacy, the legacy still gets passed down, because it goes beyond any type of social, relational dysfunction that may be. So when I brought up the whole concept of family gerrymandering, even if someone tries to redraw the lines, we're still intact, moving in tandem together. And so I just wanted to add that to that conversation.
We have a question from the chat. Oh, it just went up. Mike, did you catch it, Mike?
Yeah, I saw it, and I'll scroll back. I saw a couple of comments from the chat, so I want to hit those. One was, we strive to provide families that are open to share unconditional love, no matter what success looks like. And I think that's a great comment. I think it tracks with some of the things Reverend Brian Reverend Ellis Gibbs was saying, and others are saying. But other people can jump on that. And then I saw a second comment I'll get to in just a second. But anyone want to react to that comment?
I just want to.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I defer. Please go ahead.
No, please.
Let me just, Pastor Brian, man, what a statement of vulnerability and transparency. Really, everyone on the call has been incredibly transparent. ACEs come to mind, right? As you were talking, Brian, adverse childhood experiences, and you get into generational trauma or the macro level. You can say adverse colonial experiences. You can say adverse church experiences. You can say adverse, a bunch of C's up in there, right? But they all go back to the issue of trauma. And I always say, if we don't deal with our stuff is going to deal with us. And that was the basis of the ACEs research. And Dr. Anda and Dr. Felitti was what ostensibly was an obesity study, turned out to be a childhood trauma study. People are overeating as a symptom of what happened to them. And so, Dr. Bruce Perry was a good friend of mine, and Oprah just wrote a book, What Happened to You? And how do we not let what happened to us define us for the rest of our lives? And how do we face generational trauma? Absolutely right. Toxicity of the brain, generational trauma, that stuff gets passed down. And I think Brother Jerry said it earlier about what does healthy families look like? Don't just talk about families. I'd rather be in a healthy family. So I'd rather take 2 or 3 healthy people than a whole bunch of folk who are just unhealthy, right? Passing down generational trauma, mulling over it. And so this notion of how do we identify our trauma and how do we overcome our trauma? There's a whole section of, neuroscience called epigenetics. How do we rewire our brain? How do we rewire our experiences so that we understand that what happened to us isn't defining us, but we have to deal with it. And so, that's what kept coming to mind, Pastor Brian, as Pastor Brian was talking, and really all of this, even what Dr. Mincy said, right? What we experience in childhood stays with us. Yes. And it affects us on how we make decisions going forward, consciously and subconsciously. And so what you didn't want, Dr. Mincy, was what you saw growing up, right? And yet so many kids are experiencing trauma at such an early age that it gets encoded. before they even come out the womb, they're traumatized.
Yes.
Right. And so I just wanted to
Right.
put that science, that neuroscience piece into this conversation about resilience and overcoming our trauma.
Thank you so much for doing that. I see other comments and questions from the chat speak directly to that. So difficult to acknowledge the trauma even before we face it outwardly. And you gave some suggestions about how to reframe that. And then that question, if trauma lives in the cell memory, is it passed down generationally? And so you said a little bit about how that really is the case in fact. So Daryl, if you want to take it back, or other panelists want to jump in, if that's a present scientific reality, how do we contend with that? I mean, we always want to have these conversations to try to be hopeful and to try to help people add things to their toolbox. So like, how do we take that one on?
Last statement.
To talk about, so I was just going to say, I actually wanted to talk about that very thing. And I wanted to bring together the wealth discussion that we were having with this trauma and healing discussion. Because I think one of the things that we really need to address is that many in the Black community don't have the resources to really be able to address this trauma and find ways to move forward in healing. And folks do what they can, for sure. But what we have experienced as a people since being in this half of the hemisphere, that's a lot, and what has been passed on. And I do think the question of how Black people have been inhibited in being able to develop wealth, and the strife that causes, and the tension that causes in families as well, is a big issue. And I think one of the policy areas that we really should be developing, or some people are developing it, but developing more, is around how we really provide resources to community, and really try to, even if we don't have like exact reparations necessarily, but find ways to really promote that economic development, but also the resources that folks really need to be able to thrive as families. So I actually thought both sides of that discussion were really critical and important pieces.
Well, one thing
Following up.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Springer. Go ahead.
I'm not Dr. Springer, just Syl.
So I know you from some other places. I had too much respect for just calling you by your first name. So
Yeah,
okay.
Right. But you know what? I think what we all need to do, because we all walk around with masks on. We're crying our hearts out. Somebody says, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm just fine." Find a relationship where you can drop the mask, and you know that people will have compassion for you, they won't judge you, and they will support you. That's the only how we are going to heal. It's an individual process. It's not like a demonstration walk. It's all of us just kind of finding those relationships where we could take the mask off and feel comfortable. And that's where we begin to really get in touch with what hurts, what we've been through, and then have the audacity to embrace yourself, forgive yourself, whatever, just love yourself. And the compassion we're talking about, you have it for other people, have it for yourself.
Yes.
And this was perfect. I'm glad I did wait for you. Because my question is going to be, we as professionals, how many of us use a genogram with our clients to show them what their family structure is? Now, I know everybody on here knows what a genogram is. Some people in the community, and a lot of our clients don't even know what a genogram is. But a genogram tells your family story so well that somebody can look and say, am I going to repeat this pattern, or am I going in this direction?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to go sometimes in the profession we are now. We need to stop and pivot and give people a genogram of their life and say, hey, listen, Now you can start defining what you want for your legacy or for your family because you can see the good, the bad, the ugly, and then decide which direction you want to go into. Does that sound like
Mm-hmm.
something we should be doing more of, or that cause more trauma?
So
One of the things that troubles me about this conversation, and I don't know that it's intentional, but I'm hearing it, and I don't have a well thought out. But let me suggest what the problem with this conversation. We can have knowledge about trauma and the role that trauma plays, but I think I've heard the implicit assumption that under those circumstances, someone outside of the family is an agent or a context in which that trauma can be healed. And that's what troubles me, meaning that, I'm not a mental health expert, but I wonder if it's possible to arm families, biological families, with a translation of this research in such a way that families begin to understand when their children, young and old, encounter trauma and learn how to deal with them differently. And let me give you an example. So, two things. One of the things that the Fragile Families data is uncovering is measuring telomere length, right? And looking at, and that research has zeroed in on Black boys. And it's actually measuring how their telomere length is altered by the trauma they experience, and then the correlation between short telomere length and the likelihood that they encounter police, that they're subsequently arrested, yada, yada, yada. So we've been following these children for 20 years now. And researchers have begun to gather, collecting other data about them, including this telomere stuff, and are finding this out. So one of the things that I have been doing with this kind of research, now that a lowly economist is beginning to understand mental health, right, is trying to figure out, how do I arm families in order to deal with the trauma that their kids are experiencing? So I'm working with this researcher who is a mental health researcher. She's an African-American. Her name is Cleo Caldwell at the University of Michigan. And she has developed this intervention called Fathers and Sons, right? The purpose of Fathers and Sons is to get non-resident fathers and mothers, after their relationships have broken up, to cooperate in the upbringing and well-being of their sons. Okay, in other words, we're trying, and they part of the intervention is to talk about how children who grow up without their fathers, some of them are experiencing a great deal of pain, and how the parents, even after the romance is done, right, can still be like my brother Jerry and his ex-wife to say, we may no longer be together, but we still have this child in common, right? And our breakup has the potential to cause our child pain, so we're going to collaborate over the fixing of that, or the prevention of that, or the constraining of that, so that our child will be better off. So, and the researchers are taking this research around, for example, racism, the impact of racism on children, and they're teaching parents how to, they're studying how Black parents talk to their kids about racism, so that they're taking this scientific expertise and then bringing it back into the family, so that the family can be part of the agent of healing, and such that the agent of healing doesn't have to be external to the family, right? And so one of the ways, in that way, somebody, I'm sorry, but the economist is going to rear his ugly head, right? That way, you don't have to pay for it outside, right? If you're able to arm families with the resources they need to treat their own family members, then there is a lower cost to getting it done. And let's face it, sometimes family members are they're hard-headed. They know stuff, right? Particularly older people, and they don't think younger people or scientists can learn and teach them anything. I want to end with this. My most impressive professional experience is when I met the associate director of the National Institute of Child and Human Development. She was an African-American woman whose name I'm escaping for a moment, right? She took the research that her agency was funding on why the infant mortality rates among Blacks was so high. And she read this research, she funded this stuff, and then of all her professional stuff, she picked herself up and went to Black churches. And she took that research, she looked in the eyeballs of Black grandmothers and said, babies should sleep on their backs. And she figured out a way to convince Black grandmothers who know everything about raising their kids that no, you don't, right? Black babies should sleep on their back. And as a consequence of her work, she reduced the infant mortality rate of African-American children by 25%. So she took this scientific expertise, right, most of which was undertaken by white folks, and brought that expertise back into the family and got Black grandmothers to understand that they didn't know the best about raising their kids, because they wouldn't listen to their daughters if their daughters got this information. What do you know, right? And she changed it in a way that had real impact on the infant mortality rate. So it's possible for us to take this knowledge that we're gaining about trauma and how it functions, and then use that information. If you have the right voice, you have to have the right messenger, right? Then to provide that information back to families so that they can become more of the agents of change, no matter how hard-headed they are, right? And so that's what I worry about.
I think it's a valid worry. I want to respond very quickly, and I'm sort of responding at 30,000 feet. And I think other panelists are going to want to respond a little bit more on the ground, right? When Reverend Armstrong was talking about ACEs, I do want to say I'm actively working with my team on how we can integrate that framework to some of the work that we do. Like, we contract with the city, we contract with nonprofits around the city, and we want to bring that as another coaching framework in a non-judgmental and in a strength-based perspective. Hurt people and all that, right? So if we can, as a part of whatever the intervention is, encourage reflection, then whatever tools and tips the individual takes from that and wants to bring to the rest of their family, so be it, and all the better, because we're looking to help people take whatever the next step is, so they say. And so what I think I've heard from a lot of the panelists is, as we talked about families, even though we didn't define exactly what family is, we talked about family of origin and family of choice. And so people are doing the best that they can often with what they have. And if you're trying to confront certain family dynamics and you'd like to cut through all that, and you're not enjoying success with that, or you're being judged by your family or discriminated against your family, beat up by your family, emotionally, psychically, physically, or psychologically, physically, you're going to go with people who allow you to drop the mask for a moment. So I think it's a both and rather than and either or. And I'm just thinking about some of DYC's other work. So people who've been following the Barbershop for a while, when we did youth experiencing homelessness again last November, part of the Runaway Unhomeless Youth program exists to support young people who may have issues with their family of origin. And we have in New York City piloted work to try to help parents re-engage and youth re-engage with those families. And when it can work, that's great. And when it can't work, those young people deserve to be supported with where they are and where they need to go for it. So I'll mute my mic there, but I'm sure other people are going to want to pick this up from there.
So this is Petal. I think my concern, I guess the social worker always just keeps humming in my brain. I think my only concern is, when you're thinking about the family of origin, to Dr. Mincy's point, the study sounds amazing. And I really hope that they're able to really pilot it, get all that information, and have that really great plan to do the integration to help families become their own, in essence, therapists to help each other. And you're starting from a place of, infancy all the way up. But then when I want to think about also on the other side of the spectrum, your family that's not of origin. And are we not going to also equip those families? Because they're family, because it's where you find safety, you find love, you find acceptance, you find all of those amazing things that help you to become the person, or they, them, he, she, her, whomever that we are supposed to be, or we want to be, or we aim to be. So I think, Dr. Mincy, I'm going to challenge you, because you seem to be really in the forefront of all of this, to please try to, when you're talking to these higher ups and these voices and the people in the places of power, and authority, to think and also incorporate, let's also think about the other aspect of family, because family does not look the same for each of us on this panel. And for maybe you and I may look the same, but maybe for myself and Mr. Mike, it looks very different. So I don't want us to also become the agents of marginalization, which is what we sometimes as therapists, as people with the knowledge, as the economists, as the doctors, as all of those titles, we can become the marginalizer of the marginalized people. So in essence, we become a part of their story, and we have now walked 27 paces back when we were 47 paces already ahead. So that's a piece that I really wanted to throw out there, that I want us to really think about, kind of like the Princess Leia bun. It's two buns, and we want to give both buns enough hair to make it fluffy. I like my analogies. But Dr. Vinci, awesome stuff that you're talking about there. And if we can get that to really incorporate kind of like the X-Men, family of origin, and then your family of choice and construct, we would, in essence, be answering those questions to address, the cumulative trauma, the acute trauma that then leads to cumulative trauma, and the continuation of that build-up.
I was loving this conversation even before the Star Wars and the Marvel references were dropped. In one comment. Yeah.
I really appreciate what you just said. Frantz Fanon coined the term, the oppressed become the oppressor.
Yes.
Colonizer. I really appreciate your concern, Dr. Mincy. I think that the family, healing, I don't want to say needs or should, but I think healing does happen within the family, because that's where typically the person was broken or they experienced the trauma. But I think if people in the family are broken, I don't want to even say broken. I don't like that metaphor anymore. I don't think people are broken, because my arm is still attached to me and my head is still on my neck. So we're not broken, or we're damaged. No, we're not even damaged. We're wounded.
Wounded. Yes.
We are traumatized, and so and if so, people in the family are unaware of it or don't know how to deal with it, then the challenge becomes, you can't heal if I don't know how to heal. I can't address it if I don't know how to address it. For me, I found I was able to experience some things outside of mother and father that I did not experience with mother and father. I am a Black man who's a pastor of a Baptist church, and I go to therapy, and I'm very proud of it. And I have found in that space healing and awareness that I wasn't unable to find that, and what I've been able to do with that, speaking directly to your comment, I was able to then go to my mother and go to my father and have those conversations with them. I was able to say, you know what, Mom, I now understand what your life was like at that time. Dad, I get what you were going through. I forgive you. I also had to forgive myself, because I held on to so much anger for them that I missed out on something. But it wasn't until I worked through some stuff, and I needed the help and that to come from the external so that I could go to the internal. I love the concept of families working within the family to help each other heal. I love that. And in fact, I'm in a doctor of ministry program right now, and I'm addressing trauma that happens in the church. Not just trauma that people bring, but the trauma that happens in the church. And so it becomes really, really critical that we begin to have these kind of conversations around how do we, I think you used the word arm, arm ourselves? How do we connect to the resources like Sister Elvita talked about? How do we identify the wounds and the scars and the bruises and the, those kind of things? And what are the resources that we do have? Because, although we don't have a whole lot of resources, we got something. There are somewhere, I didn't know some stuff. I didn't know how to connect to some resources. I didn't even know what resources were available. But somehow, some way, and I know for me, for my life, God connected me to some folks that connected me to some folks that further connected me to some folks. And those people along the way, I saw them as a part of my community, my tribe, my family, because they gave me love when I didn't even know what love was. They helped me to understand some stuff about myself, even when I was too stubborn and hard-headed to hear it, and didn't want to hear it, didn't want to deal with it, that they allowed me to do that. And let me just say this. In the Bible, Jesus says something, he doesn't really talk about family too much, but he says this really interesting thing. And I'll be quick. So Jesus is in this place and space, and he's with his disciples, and he's teaching his disciples, and it's, I'm gonna use modern day kind of language. And there's a knock at the door, right? And Jesus is like, who's at the door? And let somebody in. And they come in and they say, Jesus, your mother, your brothers, they're outside. They've been looking for you, bro. They don't know where you've been. It's kind of like they're asking for you. And Jesus says this really interesting and particular thing. He says, my family, I need to let you know that these dudes right here, the ones that have been following me, learning from me, teaching from me, these are my brothers and sisters. I read that, I was like, hold up, Jesus, how are you gonna do that to your mama? How are you gonna do that to your brother? But he was doing something in that moment. And he wasn't denying Mary as his mother. He wasn't denying his brothers as his brother, but he was saying something in the context that there is a family that is created, that God is creating family, and family looks like community, and community is family. And I sit with that. I'm still sitting with it. I'm still sitting with that because there's something in that. Jesus says, those who do the will of my Father are my brothers and sisters. Those who do the will of God are my brothers and sisters. So wait a minute, Jesus, are you redefining family? Are you reframing family? What are you doing here? And then Paul in Galatians says, there's neither male nor female, neither slave nor free, neither Greek nor Jew. Well, hold up. You're just redefining all kinds of things right now. And I think, at the end of the day, family is who we call family. Family is who we love and who loves us unconditionally. And I still don't know if I'm giving my money, but family is the people who have loved me. And I'm not gonna go any further before I start crying. So I'm done.
Amen, Rev. I don't think we can go further than that.
That's a perfect time for me to throw the towel in because we gotta wrap it up. So, and Rev, I'm not sure where we go with that. Yeah. So folks, we're gonna give you all the last word to say because once again we never end the program on time. We're always running over.
Right.
So Alvita, I'm gonna let you go first and give us your closing for the barbershop.
Thank you. And thank you again for having me. I think I would close with the love ethic, really bringing that into discussions about family, especially as we kind of move out of this really traumatic time that has been COVID, to approach each other with compassion and understanding, and let that be the legacy.
Sylvia, you're next.
I think I would talk about having compassion for yourself, compassion for the people around you. Be forgiving, because as you know, the forgiveness is not for them, but it's more for you. It enables people to grow that way. And just thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. It was awesome.
Leda? Ms. Foster?
Oh, I'm sorry. So I am gonna do my takeaway would be thinking about choice and free will. In essence, tying in the spirituality and the societal piece of life, and thinking about without these two things, like how would we really be able to really define what our family looks like or who our family is, and what does that mean to us? So I'll stick with the choice and free will as a gift to all of us.
Dr. Amen?
And I want to land on top of the compassion conversation and add an element of empathy, because you can feel emotion for me or feel bad for me, but I need you to want to put yourself in my shoe. I need you to feel what I feel, especially and when we're dealing with people that are different than who we are, if they live a way that is different than what we think so. And so I would like to add, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ component, that even if you yourself have a challenge around your personal belief system about who LGBTQ people are, to remember the baseline that everyone deserves to feel safe, period, point blank. And move inside of that, and let that be what you teach your children. Let that be what you share in your family. Listen, regardless, they deserve to be safe in the space that they share with you. And so that's the part that I would like to add.
Dr. Amen, don't take your clippers and stuff. Leave them right there. You got to come back in June and get your clippers and stuff. Just leave them right there.
I will be back.
Just leave your chair as it is right there. It ain't going nowhere. We'll make sure. So when June comes around, your stuff be right there in the chair. Mr. Armstrong, you're up next.
Just on the science of ACEs, I always want to say, I have a ACE score of 9 or 10, depending on how you answer one question. And I always want to say to anyone that an ACE score is not predictive, it is only descriptive. And we need to understand that where we start, it doesn't have to be where we finish. I always cite to foster children and adopted children, particularly those who are angry at their parents. I said, listen, the fifth commandment is not for the parents. It's for you, brother and sister. Honor your mother, honor your father. And the word honor can be taken many different ways, but the honoring is that your days may be long. And I'm sick and tired of seeing too many Black and brown children die because of the adversities that they've never been able to overcome. And so where we start does not have to be where we finish.
And I got to get you come to talk to the men in our fathers group about that kind of stuff. Dr. Flo Mincy, you're first, then Ron's afterwards. You're muted.
Thank you guys so much for having us. This has been a rich discussion, and I think to be continued because there's lots to say. But as I listened and I was reflecting on my own, life, growing up, and one of the things that I want to pass on, I would love to pass on and have passed on, is that, we who have gone through different types of trauma in our lives and overcome them, that we begin to be the light for someone else. Or, I'm going to say kids because that's where it starts when we're young. And two things that I have walked with probably since I was about 10 years old is one statement, and I'm blanking on who says it, but, it might have been King Lear, I'm not sure, but he said, set your standards high although you may not reach them. And no matter what was going on for me, that's what I did. I was focusing, setting my standards high, making sure that I overcome whatever I was dealing with, because I know there's got to be a brighter side. And the second part of this was a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt that says, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." So, and those two things have carried me throughout, whenever, if I feel somebody criticize me, I'll always go back. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. If I buy into it, then I'm going to be totally depressed, and I don't want to be. So, that's my take. Be a light, be an encouragement to someone else, especially, yeah.
Yeah, again, I'll join Flona in thanking you for this opportunity to share with you. I'm full of thoughts around this. I've learned so much. I particularly appreciate Patel's comment about both and, because I think you are correct. I mean, it has to be. Pastor Ellis, I'm remembering also the scripture talks about he took the solitary and places them in families. And so for some of us, we have families and they can be the vehicle for healing. For others of us, for whatever reason, our biological families are unable to perform that function or unwilling to do so. So he takes the solitary and puts them in families. And Dr. Amin, I think that's what you've been saying throughout, particularly for the LGBTQ community. And I can receive that, and I've learned a lot. But I just like to say, the last thing I'm thinking of was, your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your house, your children as olive branches beyond around your table. For behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. And I've been able to enjoy and prosper from all of that. And I'm grateful for it. I realize that not everybody is in that position, but I'm thankful for, the wife and family and children that God has given me. And I guess having grown up without that and the pain that was associated with it, I have wanted to heal my own children as a consequence of that. And then I've spent the last 30 years trying to heal as many children as I can of the same trauma. But thank you for this conversation. It's been rich.
Pastor Gibbs, I'm gonna let you do the benediction.
I just say, we cannot allow our trauma to prevent us from moving forward, but see it as an opportunity for transformation, and allow that pain to become our power. We can live into our best selves. And if you need help, get help. Find a space that is safe. Don't allow the trauma to be your out, but allow it to be that open door that leads you to greater life, deeper breath. I know the pain of facing it, and I know the joy of being healed from it. It is possible. And I don't know who's watching. I don't know, but it is possible to move beyond and to live into something new. And so the conversation, and God will, I am who I am. God will provide you the family, the community, the tribe, the resources, the network that you need if you truly desire wellness, wholeness, and healing.
Woo. Closing of another great barbershop. Jerry and Mike, we gotta get somebody to start subscribing to write a book with all the stuff that we're getting.
Right.
These are some bestsellers that we've been doing. So
yeah.
So before I do, Mike, I want you to close out. So Jerry, you'll now talk, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him do the closing before we have the thing. So awesome conversation. I'm glad that we had all our panelists on. It did a lot of healing for many of us, from where we've gone from a culture of Black people who are doing awesome things, we have to be careful of not letting someone else define what our family is. I believe it's definitely up to us to figure out who our family is, what our family is, and make it our own. But we have to understand who we are first. Once we get to understand who we are first, then we get to start defining other things around us, and then look to making it what we want it to be as far as our legacy, how we want to leave our mark on the world. Jerry, I'll give it to you, let you give your piece, and then you turn it over to Mike and let him close it out for us.
Definitely got it. I'm still in awe, still taking in the amazing gems that was given. And as I reflect back for all that the Black family has been through, the two words that really come to mind is resiliency and just beauty. I love the concept of family and that it doesn't have to look like someone else's, but whatever it is that you dare to create, as long as it's intentionally a legacy that provides a wealth of healing, presence, being present, safety, and support, because I truly believe that there's a special place for those that simply share life with you, regardless of you. And though you will never be the cause of your trauma, once you're made aware of it, you are responsible to not stay there. Right? And what does that look like for you? And we can really build and expound on this beautiful thing called family, especially for those of color. So with that, I'm just grateful for the conversation. Thank you to all the panelists. I left here better than how I came in, and I'm gonna take that and I'll just pass it over to Mike.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Scott. Thank you all the panelists. Because we're over, I'm gonna try to be short. I heard throughout the conversation, and particularly in the closing, people talk about love, compassion, and empathy, and trauma. And I'm sitting in this space right now about how we have an opportunity to lean into all of that and bring that forward. We easily could have spent another hour. We could do a whole other session about this, but but as it happened, we had these 2 hours. We invested that time, and it's amazing to me that we canvassed hundreds of years of Black history, right up till like today, and what do we need to do tomorrow? And it was challenging at times, but still fun. You know what I mean? Like we kind of we dug in, and everyone very actively participated. And thank you everyone for questions and comments in the chat. We started the Barbershop talks responding to the pandemic, responding to the quarantine, and the curfew in response to the George Floyd murder and other issues, right? And so every time we try to launch one of these conversations, I think we're always mindful about adding value to whoever is joining us. Even if they're not on the panel, you're in the conversation with us. And we always want to try to point you toward resources the city makes available to help you and to help your family. And so we spent 2 hours talking about the Black family. And what I am struck by is, and we'll post the resources again. There are a lot of services available to you. Heard from some of our service providers and from other city agency stakeholders and members of the faith-based community who are here for you. And they've elevated a conversation that you get to choose who you can bring forward and want to bring forward as part of your family and declare that they are part of your family. And you get to lean into your pain and trauma with love and compassion and empathy, and continue to build your future. And I find that very empowering. And I think other members of the panel here would agree that in their own personal walk, as their professional walk, that's kind of what we're all doing. We will be inviting some of these fine folks back to future conversations. We talked about legacy in December, that came up. We talked about financial literacy a bunch last year, and that came up. So I think all of these conversations interconnect to some extent, because we're talking about us. We're talking about healing. We're talking about growing powerfully. And I'm just really thankful that this conversation unfolded this way. And with that, wish you well. We know we will be back in March, and we want to talk about human trafficking. What do men need to know and say about human trafficking? Another deep discussion, which we will dig very what's the word I'm looking for? We will dig into at great depth. I think I'm talked out after about 2 hours plus. That's it. So I'll close there. Is that it, Scott, or outro music at this point?
yes, that's it. We're going to bring on the music as we close out. And once again, thank you everyone for joining us. Catch us next month. Like Mike said, we're talking about trafficking. We have some other topics we're working on coming up ahead of time. So make sure that you tune in, subscribe to this channel so that you can get the notices, and we can keep chopping it up. So until next time.
DYCD Barbershop Talks. Fatherhood matters. Diverse. Hey yo, these is barbershop talks where the fathers pop off. Brag about relationships and argue about sports. Every topic's a favorite, is how we plot course toward changes. It all begins with dialogue and patience. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. Chop it up, boss. Chop it up, boss. It's barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. It's barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. It's barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boss. Chop.